Look at this, I'm growing 2 crops in the same space as one. Now you might think my plants are a little bit overcrowded, but there's a clever way we can grow both at once and double our harvests without crops suffering. Today I'm going to explain how pro gardeners use this exact method to maximise harvests, reduce pests and keep weeds at bay so you can benefit too. Let's get into it. Growing 2 crops together in the same space is a gardening technique known as intercropping or sometimes interplanting. It works because we carefully choose what plants to grow with each other so they don't compete. Here I've got a fast growing variety of turnip growing in between these much slower growing broccoli. Now the turnips are lightning fast. They take about 6 weeks to go from sowing to harvest, and I can see that the roots are beginning to form up nicely. These guys will be out of the ground long before the broccoli needs the extra space to put on its final spurt of growth. Both the turnips and broccoli were planted at the same time, safe in the knowledge that the turnips here will never get in the way of the broccoli. Other fast-growing crops that are perfect for making opportunistic use of space between slower growers include the likes of radish, spinach, and salads like lettuce and arugula or rocket. So while I do dedicate bed space for fast growers like this, if I have any spare, which I invariably do because I like to grow a few spares, well, I'll have some young plants here to pop in amongst slower growing crops that won't mind the company. Let's look at a few more examples. Like here, where I've got the last of these radishes growing in between these cauliflower. Now, eagle-eyed regular viewers might recognise this from our radish growing masterclass video, which I'll link to down below. But these are all pretty mature now, so I think it's time to gather the last of them in. The likes of radish and lettuce are perfect paired with just about any slower growing crop. For example, corn while it gets going, or indeed newly planted tomatoes. Another way to use radishes is to mark out rows of slow to germinate crops like parsnip. Now here I've got both radish and parsnips growing in the same rows. The parsnip seedlings are still very small, but you can see them here, but the radishes on the other hand are almost ready to go, maybe another 1 or 2 days. Sowing radishes with my parsnips has helped to clearly mark out the rows while I wait for the parsnips to germinate, and I get a cheeky bonus harvest. Now they're not quite ready, but let me show you how I will harvest so as not to disturb the parsnip seedlings. I'll just take the top of my radish and then carefully twist while pulling like that, and then there's very minimal disturbance to the parsnip seedlings left behind. Then over here I've planted some lettuces underneath my black currants. The lettuces won't mind growing in the shade of the currants, especially as we head into the warmer months, and the currants certainly won't be bothered by these shallow rooters. It's a match made in heaven. Intercropping like this is a fantastic way of making the most efficient use of space because we're growing 2 crops in the space of 1. Intercropping opens up the opportunity for us to match plants that actively benefit one another. We're sort of acting like a plant dating agency in this way. Companion planting like this not only improves overall growth, but can even deter pests. One example is to grow carrots alongside onion family plants to deter their respective pests, carrot fly and onion fly. The foliage of both has a distinctive smell, which the pests use to home in on their preferred crop, but we can use this to our advantage by using the scent of one to mask the scent of the other, thereby reducing the risk of pests ever finding their target. Carrots and onions have very contrasting leaf textures as well, sowing further confusion among the flies. Let's set up a new onion and carrot patch here. So I'm going to be sowing a main crop variety of carrot, which produces really good hefty roots suitable for storing. So to allow for that, I'm going to set my rows about 1 foot or 30 centimetres apart. So I'm starting with the rows here, about 1 centimetre or just under ½ an inch deep. And now to sow. Nice and steady and nice and thinly into the row little drill you've made. And then just cover them over and pat them down. My onions are going to go in between my carrots here, and if I had a bit more room without the celery, I'd put a 4th row here. So I'd have carrots, onions, alternating like that. Now it's a bit late in the season to be planting bulbing onions, so I've got these spare salad onions here, also known as scallions or spring onions. And as they're grown in little clusters, I'm going to plant them about 25 centimetres or 10 inches apart within the row. And here's this bed updated on my garden plan, and you can see the alternating rows of carrot and onion. The shaded areas show how much space each crop will take, and you can see they're slightly overlapping here. Now ordinarily I would try and avoid that, but in this case, like many intercropping setups, there's a solid reason for them to do so. The deep-rooted carrots won't interfere with the shallow-rooted onions and vice versa. One of the most famous intercropping combinations is the classic Three Sisters combination of corn, squash and climbing beans. This makes use of their different growing habits. The corn grows nice and tall, offering support for the beans, which fixes nitrogen at its roots for the other crops. The squash, meanwhile, is left to sprawl at ground level, where its big leaves crowd out weeds and keep the soil nice and cool, so it needs less watering. Timing is everything. The corn goes in first, then once it's reached about a foot or 30 centimetres tall, it's time for the beans and squash. The beans are sown at the base of each corn stalk and the squash about 3 foot or 90 centimetres apart. This here is my modest squash patch. Now I planted my squash last week, and you can watch the video that covers that, which I'll link to down below. I'm growing my beans elsewhere, but I thought I might get some more little corn plants in here to make the most of this space. Now I'll be honest, I didn't grow these from seed, I bought them from the local plant nursery, but they're a little baby variety of corn, so they don't actually need to be pollinated, which is quite good because this is a very sheltered area, so there's less wind here. And they'll just go in between my squash, and rather than having 3 sisters, well, I've got 2 of them. Like a few of the crop combinations we've mentioned today, this is an example of underplanting. I've planted my squash underneath the lofty corn. Now there are lots of other examples of underplanting. Here in the greenhouse, I'm getting more from the space I have by underplanting my tomatoes, which will grow up like this, with lower growing, shallower rooted crops. So I've got some lettuce here, some more salad onions and some French marigolds, which are great for attracting pest predators like tiny wasps. And then once the lettuce are done, I'll be planting some basil. This all works because the underplants won't interfere with the tomatoes, which have a far more deeper and more extensive root system to support what will be all of that top growth. What we're sort of doing here is mimicking the forest in a way. You've got the kind of canopy layer of the tomatoes, if you like, and then the shrub and plant layer underneath. We're mimicking nature. Just about any climbing or vertically trained crop can be underplanted to get the most from the space you have. Try growing shade-loving salads beneath cucumber vines, for example. In fact, planting low-growing, cool-season crops beneath taller sun lovers is a savvy strategy. In this area, I'm trialling a new way of growing beans. Rather than growing them straight up vertical supports like bamboo canes, they're planted here, and I'll grow them and train them up here, up off the ground, but then horizontally along this bar here, right to the end. Now, rather than waste the space underneath, I've underplanted it with a few spinach plants and a zucchini or courgette. They're far enough away from the bean plant here so as not to interfere with it, so I'm going to make sure that all of this space is used. There are so many ways to intercrop, and I hope this video has given you a few ideas for your garden. I'll catch you next time.